I became a licensed funeral director and embalmer in 2009 after completing my mortuary science degree at the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science. For 13 years, I worked at Riverside Memorial Chapel in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a mid-sized funeral home that handled approximately 200 cases annually, everything from natural deaths to traumatic accidents. I'd prepared bodies recovered from the Tennessee River, embalmed gunshot victims, reconstructed faces shattered in car accidents, and guided thousands of grieving families through the worst days of their lives. I thought I'd seen every possible variation of death the human body could experience. I was certain that nothing could shake my clinical understanding of mortality, that science and procedure could explain everything that happened in my preparation room. Then on March 8, 2022, Eleanor Voss arrived on my table, and everything I believed about the finality of death collapsed. I submitted my resignation 4 months later, and I haven't stepped foot in a funeral home since. The preparation room at Riverside was a sterile, fluorescent-lit space in the basement, separated from the viewing parlors by 2 sets of security doors. The porcelain embalming table sat beneath surgical lights, surrounded by trocar cabinets, arterial fluid pumps, and sterilization equipment that hummed constantly. I'd spent tens of thousands of hours in that room, and it had always felt like a sanctuary of order, a place where chaos was methodically transformed into peaceful closure. The chemical smell of formaldehyde and phenol had long since stopped bothering me. The weight of responsibility had become comfortable. I was good at my job, perhaps too confident in my mastery of post-mortem processes. The room measured 20 feet by 15 feet, with walls lined in white subway tile that could be sanitized after each case. A large stainless steel sink occupied the corner, next to cabinets filled with arterial fluid bottles in various colors. Pink for standard cases, high index for difficult embalming situations, jaundice fluid for liver failure cases. Eleanor Voss was 73 years old when she died of congestive heart failure at Erlanger Hospital on March 7, 2022 at 11:47 p.m. Her daughter, Rebecca Voss Chen, called our service the following morning requesting a traditional viewing and burial at Chattanooga National Cemetery. Standard case. The body arrived at 2:15 p.m. in a sealed transport bag, accompanied by the death certificate signed by Dr. Ramsh Kulkarni, the attending physician. Cause of death: cardiac arrest, secondary to chronic heart failure. Time since death: approximately 14 hours. Body temperature had equilibrated to ambient. No unusual findings noted in the hospital report. I began the external examination at 2:30 p.m., following the protocol I'd performed thousands of times. Eleanor measured 5 feet 4, approximately 130 pounds, with silver white hair and the characteristic mottled livor mortis on her posterior surfaces. Gravity-driven blood pooling exactly where it should be after 14 hours supine. Her eyes were partially open, clouded with the expected post-mortem film. Rigor mortis had fully set in, making her limbs stiff but still manipulable with standard techniques. Everything was textbook normal. I noted no wounds, no signs of trauma, no unusual discoloration beyond the typical post-mortem changes. Her medical bracelet indicated a pacemaker, which I'd need to document and remove before cremation. Standard procedure, though she was scheduled for burial. Her fingernails showed slight cyanosis, the blue-gray coloring typical of cardiac-related deaths. The skin had the waxy texture I'd expect after this time interval. At 3:05 p.m., I made the initial incision along the right clavicle to access the carotid artery and jugular vein for arterial embalming. The scalpel cut cleanly through the already cooling tissue. I located the common carotid artery, elevated it with an aneurysm hook, and made a small arterial incision to insert the cannula. This is where things stopped making sense. When I opened the artery, fresh blood pulsed out. Not the thick, congealed post-mortem blood I'd expect after 14 hours. Not the dark, separated serum and clotted cells that characterize death. Bright red, oxygenated blood pumped from the arterial incision in rhythmic spurts, spattering across my gloves and the drainage tray. I jerked back instinctively, my mind racing through impossible explanations. Post-mortem blood pressure doesn't exist. The heart stops, pressure equalizes, blood settles. There is no mechanism for arterial blood to pulse from a corpse 14 hours dead. I checked her carotid pulse point with my fingers. Nothing. I placed my stethoscope against her chest, listening for any cardiac activity. Absolute silence. I checked the hospital documentation again. Time of death confirmed. Physician's signature present. No notes about resuscitation attempts or delayed declaration. Eleanor Voss was legally and clinically dead, yet arterial blood continued to seep from the incision. Slower now, but still liquid. Still impossibly fresh. I'd seen post-mortem purge before, decomposition gases forcing fluid from body cavities. But this wasn't that. Purge is dark, malodorous, mixed with gastric contents. This was clean arterial blood, the kind that only flows in living circulation. I applied pressure to stop the bleeding, then inserted the arterial cannula and connected it to the embalming machine. The Porty-Boy pump hummed to life, set to inject 2 gallons of formaldehyde-based arterial solution at 18 pounds of pressure. The fluid should have met resistance from coagulated blood, should have required manual manipulation to distribute through the vascular system. Instead, the arterial fluid flowed through her system like water through new pipes. The pressure gauge remained steady at optimal levels. Her tissues firmed beautifully, coloration spreading across her face, and hands with textbook perfection. In 23 years of practice, I'd never seen such efficient arterial distribution in a body this long post-mortem. It was as if her cardiovascular system was still fully functional, still responsive, still somehow alive despite every clinical indicator of death. The formaldehyde solution should have taken 45 minutes minimum to distribute properly in a body with this much post-mortem time elapsed. Eleanor's tissues accepted the fluid in less than 20 minutes. At 3:47 p.m., while I was suturing the arterial incision, Eleanor's left hand moved. Not a twitch from escaping gases. Not the subtle settling that sometimes occurs during embalming. Her fingers curled slowly inward, forming a loose fist, then relaxed again. The movement was deliberate, coordinated, impossible. I stepped back from the table, my heart hammering against my ribs. Embalmed bodies don't move. The formaldehyde solution I just pumped through her system denatures proteins, fixes tissues, destroys any possibility of muscular function. There is no neurological explanation for voluntary movement after arterial embalming. Jesus Christ, I whispered to the empty preparation room. I stood there for a full minute, watching her hand for any additional movement. Nothing. I checked her pupils with my pen light, fixed and dilated, no response. I checked her carotid again, no pulse. I pressed my stethoscope against her chest, listening intently. Nothing. I was alone in the basement, the ventilation system cycling through its standard hum, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. No witnesses. No one to confirm what I'd seen. The temperature in the preparation room read 68 degrees Fahrenheit on the wall thermometer, exactly where I kept it for optimal working conditions. Professional protocol dictated I continue the embalming process. I began cavity aspiration at 4:10 p.m., inserting the long metal trocar through her abdominal wall to remove gases and fluids from the thoracic and abdominal cavities. The trocar punctured through tissue with normal resistance, and I activated the suction. The aspirator pulled dark fluid from her stomach, intestines, and bladder, all standard post-mortem findings. Then I angled the trocar upward to aspirate the thoracic cavity, piercing through the diaphragm into the chest. The trocar hit something solid, something that shouldn't be solid. I adjusted the angle and tried again. Same resistance. I withdrew the trocar and examined the tip. No tissue obstruction, no mechanical failure. I reinserted it, this time watching the depth marker carefully. The trocar should have slid easily into the chest cavity, between the lungs and heart. Instead, it met firm resistance at exactly the point where Eleanor's heart sat in her chest. It felt like pushing the trocar against a stone. Hearts don't become stone hard 14 hours after death. They become flaccid, they soften, they're easily punctured. I'd aspirated thousands of hearts without ever encountering resistance like this. I tried 3 more times, adjusting angles, applying more pressure. The trocar would not penetrate her heart. It was as if the organ had calcified into solid mass, which was physiologically impossible in this time frame. I even switched to a new trocar from the cabinet, thinking perhaps the instrument had become dulled somehow. The fresh trocar met the same impenetrable resistance. I completed the cavity aspiration around the obstruction, injected cavity fluid, and closed the trocar puncture with a trocar button. My hands were shaking. I completed the surface preservation, washing her skin, applying massage cream, positioning her features, on autopilot while my mind churned through medical explanations. Severe cardiac calcification? But that would have been noted in her medical history and visible on imaging. Post-mortem artifact? But nothing in mortuary literature described anything like this. At 5:30 p.m., while I was setting her facial features with eye caps and mouth former, Eleanor's eyes opened, both eyes simultaneously, the lids retracting smoothly to reveal those clouded corneas. They didn't track, didn't focus, showed no signs of consciousness, but they opened with the same deliberate quality as the hand movement, as if responding to some internal stimulus I couldn't measure. I was staring directly at her face when it happened, less than 2 feet away. There was no mistaking what I saw. "Eleanor," my voice cracked. "Mrs. Voss?" No response. Her eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling. I reached out with trembling fingers and manually closed the lids. They stayed closed. I stepped back, waiting. 30 seconds passed. 1 minute. The eyes remained closed. I exhaled slowly, trying to rationalize what I'd witnessed. Post-mortem muscle spasm. Late rigor mortis manifestation. Some bizarre interaction between the embalming chemicals and remaining neural tissue. I finished positioning her features, dressed her in the blue dress her daughter had provided, applied cosmetics to restore natural color, and transferred her to the refrigerated holding unit at 6:45 p.m. Standard procedure was to keep bodies at 40 degrees Fahrenheit until the viewing. I closed the heavy stainless steel door, the magnetic seal clicking into place, and stood in the preparation room trying to steady my breathing. The holding unit was a walk-in model, capable of storing 6 bodies simultaneously on individual rolling trays. Eleanor occupied the center position. I called Dr. Kulkarni's office and left a message asking about any unusual findings during Eleanor's final hours at the hospital. I documented everything I'd observed in my private notes, not in the official embalming report, because I knew how it would sound. I cleaned and sterilized the preparation room, washing Eleanor's blood from the drainage tray, and tried to convince myself that I'd misinterpreted normal post-mortem phenomena. The viewing was scheduled for March 10th, 2 days later. I arrived at Riverside at 7 a.m. to transfer Eleanor from refrigeration to the viewing parlor. When I opened the holding unit door, her eyes were open again. Not just open, she'd turned her head approximately 30 degrees to the right, facing the inside wall of the refrigeration unit. Her right arm had shifted position, no longer crossed over her chest where I'd positioned it, but extended slightly toward the unit door. The blue dress was undisturbed, the cosmetics intact, but her body had unmistakably moved inside a sealed, refrigerated unit where movement was thermodynamically impossible. I called my colleague, James Okafor, who'd been working at Riverside for 8 years. He arrived within 20 minutes, and we both stood in front of the open refrigeration unit, staring at Eleanor's repositioned body. "Did you position her facing right?" James asked quietly. "Face up, arms crossed, exactly as she is in the photographs." I showed him the documentation photos I'd taken after dressing her. Clear images showing her face up, arms crossed, eyes closed. "Temperature gauge shows constant 38 degrees, James said, checking the digital readout. "No interruptions in cooling. Seal integrity intact. No one else has access to this unit except you and me." We transferred Eleanor to a wheeled gurney and brought her back to the preparation room. Under bright surgical lighting, we conducted a thorough re-examination. Her body remained properly embalmed. Firm tissues, good color distribution, no signs of decomposition. But her neck showed clear evidence of rotation, with slight creasing in the skin where the head had turned. Her right shoulder joint showed the characteristic compression patterns of having been extended and held in a new position. "Bodies don't move in refrigeration," James said, stating the obvious. "Rigor mortis is already fixed. Embalming solution has set the tissues. There's no mechanism for this. I know, I replied. You know what this sounds like, James continued, his voice low. This sounds like someone moved her, like someone got into the unit. The seal wasn't broken. The security logs show no entry. And you see the same thing I see. Those tissue compression patterns aren't from someone repositioning a body. They're from sustained pressure, like she held that position for hours. We repositioned her face up, closed her eyes again with additional adhesive, and crossed her arms more securely. Neither of us spoke about what we both understood. This defied every principle of mortuary science. We transferred her to the viewing parlor, positioned her in the open casket, and arranged flowers around her as specified by the family. The viewing began at 2 p.m. Approximately 40 people attended. Family, friends, former colleagues from her 30 years as an elementary school teacher. At 3:15 p.m., Rebecca Voss Chen approached me in the corridor outside the viewing parlor. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly together. "Mr. Anderson," she said quietly, "my mother's eyes keep opening." My stomach dropped. "I'm sorry. What?" "During the viewing. I've been sitting beside her casket, and twice now her eyes have opened. Just slightly, like she's trying to wake up. Other people have noticed too. My aunt saw it, and several of Mom's friends. We keep closing them, but they open again." I returned to the viewing parlor with Rebecca. Eleanor lay peaceful in the white-lined casket, eyes closed, hands crossed over her chest. I stood to the side, watching discreetly. 12 minutes later, while a group of attendees were paying their respects, Eleanor's left eyelid twitched, then slowly opened halfway. An elderly woman standing beside the casket gasped and stepped back. Rebecca quickly reached out and gently closed her mother's eye, whispering apologies to the other attendees. This happened 4 more times during the 3-hour viewing. Each time, I applied additional adhesive, used more aggressive eye cap positioning, everything in my professional arsenal to keep those eyelids closed. Nothing worked for more than 20 minutes. By 5 p.m., when the viewing concluded, at least 15 people had witnessed Eleanor's eyes opening repeatedly. The family was gracious, attributing it to normal post-mortem settling, but I could see the disturbed looks, the whispered conversations. The burial occurred the following morning at Chattanooga National Cemetery. Cold wind, gray sky, full military honors for her late husband's service. I stayed at the gravesite after the family departed, watching the grounds crew lower Eleanor's casket into the earth, watching them seal the vault and begin filling the grave. I stood there until the last shovel of soil was placed, until the grave was completely covered. The whole process took 90 minutes. I watched every moment. 2 weeks later, another body arrived with similar impossibilities. Gerald Hoffman, 67, died of complications from diabetes at Memorial Hospital on March 22nd. Time of death, 6:23 a.m. Body arrived at Riverside at 1:40 p.m. I began embalming at 2:15 p.m. When I made the arterial incision, fresh blood pulsed from the carotid, the same impossible phenomenon I'd witnessed with Eleanor. His tissues distributed embalming fluid with the same unnatural efficiency. During cavity aspiration, the trocar met the same stone-hard resistance when attempting to puncture his heart. At 4 p.m., Gerald's right foot rotated outward 30 degrees while I was working on his facial features. I called James immediately. We both witnessed Gerald's jaw shift slightly, muscles tensing and relaxing despite the formaldehyde saturation that should have made such movement impossible. James recorded video on his phone. 3 minutes of footage showing subtle but undeniable movement in Gerald's facial muscles. "We need to report this," James said. "Report what? That dead bodies are moving? To who? The medical examiner will think we've lost our minds. The families will sue us for incompetence or disturbing their loved ones." Then what do? We document everything. We keep records, and we try to understand what's happening. The third case arrived on April 9th. Linda Kowalski, 54, sudden cardiac arrest. Same arterial blood flow, same impenetrable heart, same subtle movements during preparation. A finger twitch here, a facial muscle contraction there. Always when we weren't looking directly, always small enough to question, but accumulating into undeniable pattern. I stopped sleeping. I researched medical literature, mortuary journals, toxicology reports. I found nothing. No documented cases of post-mortem arterial pressure, no explanation for cardiac calcification in recently deceased patients, no mechanism for muscular coordination after embalming. I called Dr. Kulkarni repeatedly, but he insisted Eleanor's death was completely routine, her medical history unremarkable beyond the chronic heart failure. James and I began documenting everything: photographs, video recordings, detailed notes. We never told the families. What would we say? Your loved one's body is exhibiting impossible signs of activity? That would sound like horror fiction, like we'd lost our minds. We maintained absolute professionalism during viewings, even as we watched bodies shift subtly in their caskets, even as we witnessed the same unnatural phenomena repeating. I started investigating the connection between the cases. Eleanor, Gerald, and Linda had all died at different hospitals, different attending physicians, no shared medical conditions beyond cardiac involvement, different ages, backgrounds, no apparent connection. I pulled their obituaries, researched their lives, looking for any common thread. Nothing. Eleanor was a retired teacher. Gerald was a mechanic. Linda worked in retail. They'd never met, lived in different neighborhoods, attended different churches. The only commonality was their deaths, all cardiac-related, all sudden despite chronic conditions, and all exhibiting the same impossible post-mortem phenomena in my preparation room. On April 30th, I submitted my resignation to the director of Riverside Memorial Chapel. I didn't explain why. I couldn't. James left 3 weeks later, taking a position at a crematorium where he'd never have to embalm another body. We don't talk about what we saw. What's the point? No one would believe us. We barely believe ourselves. I think about Eleanor Voss constantly. I think about the other cases I prepared over 13 years. Were there others like her that I missed? Subtle signs I dismissed as normal post-mortem phenomena? How many bodies did I embalm that shouldn't have been embalmed, that were somehow hovering in a state between death and whatever comes next? The death certificate said Eleanor died at 11:47 p.m. on March 7th. Dr. Kulkarni confirmed no heartbeat, no respiration, no brain activity. By every medical and legal standard, she was dead. But 14 hours later, her heart was pumping blood. Her muscles were contracting with purpose. Her cardiovascular system was accepting embalming fluid like living tissue. And something in her chest had become dense as stone, impenetrable, as if protecting itself from the tools of my trade. I'm working construction now, building things instead of preparing dead bodies. I sleep better mostly, but sometimes I wonder what Eleanor is doing in that sealed casket, 6 feet under Chattanooga National Cemetery. I wonder if she's still in there, eyes opening and closing in the darkness, heart like stone, somehow continuing in a state that has no name in medical science. The families never knew. That's what haunts me most. We gave them closure, beautiful viewings, peaceful final images of their loved ones. But I don't know what we actually buried. I don't know what's really happening in those sealed caskets, in that cold earth. I've been out of the funeral business for 6 months now. Last week I drove past Chattanooga National Cemetery. I parked outside the gates and stared at the rows of white headstones stretching across the manicured lawn. Eleanor's grave is in section 47, plot 288. I know exactly where it is. I sat in my truck for 40 minutes, trying to convince myself to walk in, to stand at her grave, to see if I could sense anything unusual. I couldn't do it. I started the engine and drove away, because deep down, I'm terrified that I would sense something, that standing above her grave, I'd feel some impossible vibration through the earth, some confirmation that what we buried isn't resting in peace. And I'm even more terrified that someday I'll read about exhumations in Chattanooga, about caskets open for whatever reason, and what the investigators will find inside.